Humans have been telling stories since we showed up on this spinning hunk of rock. From cave paintings and folklore to the epics of Sumer, India, Greece, and Rome to modern media, we've always shared the details of our lives via storytelling. Video games are no different. In many ways, a video game is probably something that our ancient ancestors telling their stories would be mind blown by. A story that you can interact with and change and live, now that's something special. In keeping with that grand tradition, allow me to tell you a story. On May 13th, 2024, Ubisoft finally announced a cinematic trailer premiere for the next entry in the sprawling Assassin's Creed universe, previously referred to only as Codename Red. Gamers have been excited for this game for a long time. It's tapping into the at times controversial but mostly well-received open-world RPG branch of the Assassin's Creed tree. And for a long time, what we knew about it was that it would be set in Japan and feature ninjas and samurai. Which, badass. Who doesn't like media about ninjas and samurai right now? They also unveiled the official name, Assassin's Creed Shadows. The response on Twitter was overwhelmingly positive at this point. A lot of people being really excited to play in the comments. Folks who were feeling motivated to finish other games and DLC in the series ahead of a new entry, and lots of gifs like this. People were super excited for the trailer release, from gaming influencers and media to just average Joe/Jane gamers whose attention was piqued by a potentially huge and very well anticipated AAA release in a beloved series. And then, on May 15th, the trailer dropped, and everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. For a moment, everyone was having a great time, watching and breaking down the trailer. Folks were pumped to see an actual historical figure from the time period not only appear as an NPC, as they have in previous Assassin's Creed games, but as a playable character. The first time that this has happened in the very long history of the franchise. Personally, I was in a stream having a conversation about different playstyles and how the ability to switch between a very traditional assassin and more of a melee assassin might appeal to certain playstyles. It was a brilliant moment of folks being sometimes critical, but mostly just super excited for a new, long-awaited entry to the franchise. And then suddenly, the comment section started looking like this. Lots of screaming about games being woke, or yelling about narrative consulting companies doing their jobs, or screeching about DEI detected the moment that someone who isn't a straight white dude works on a game. I want to make it really clear that I'm not anti-cishet white dudes, okay? When I use these descriptors, they're not indicative of morality, which is how it should be. TBH. I want to use this video to really dig into what we see as diversity in gaming and why it's not only good for gaming, but also good for your brain. And will there be some critiques of the video game industry and society as a whole? Yes. If y'all haven't noticed, that's kind of my vibe. If that's a vibe you appreciate, stick around. If it's not, well, I'm sure you'll tell me about it in the comments anyway, so we can chat there. DEI as a concept has existed for a long time. It was adopted into the corporate lexicon in the early to mid-2000s as more research made it apparent that diverse teams were both good for most companies' image and also more productive overall. More recently, it's become a hot-button issue thanks to extreme politicization around marginalized identities, which is just, It's exhausting if you happen to be someone who holds one or more of these identities, because all it takes is you being visibly part of one of these identities in certain spaces to attract folks who seem to have an honest problem with the idea that they are not the center of the universe. Often, people commenting things like DEI detected, referencing Sweet Baby Inc., etc., are just kind of parroting things that they've heard from their favorite edgy gaming influencer. And it's starting to become shorthand for, I see a story being told about someone who isn't exactly like me, and I'm upset by that. Remember how humans have been telling stories basically forever? Well, we've also been telling diverse stories forever. Even in ancient cave paintings, the animals, human figures, and mythological beings depicted are different depending on their origin. Fast forward several thousand years, and the folks who made this art would be mind blown by the different options available to tell stories. We truly live in an overwhelmingly productive era of media. In gaming alone, we've seen a continual uptick in releases over the last 6 years. And of course, as more games are released and become considered part of art within culture, we see more people playing games too. And the more people play games, the more people go into the gaming industry, and the more perspectives are brought to the table. Gaming isn't just live service shooters and arcade-style one-offs anymore, and that's a good thing for gaming. If anything, gamers need more games that break the mold a little. Often, when I see folks complaining about lacking a certain type of game, it's because that kind of game is a risk monetarily for the companies that make them. This is the part where I'm going to critique the video game industry a little bit. Your fellow gamers enjoying a game or function that includes them is not what stands in the way of a truly new story-based closed-world game or the challenge game for those who think the Souls-likes are too easy, etc. It's that those kind of games have a potential to flop, and flop hard, and the companies that make them aren't willing to take that kind of risk. Turning on your fellow gamers does nothing here. If anything, it makes it easier to dismiss us as a group. One of the misconceptions I see the most in this space is the idea that the existence of games with diverse origins, creators, and development processes will take away or take over the industry and the kinds of games that folks like to play. And that's simply not true. Other stories being told does not prevent your story from being told. And if anything, the video game industry is still a very closed field, especially in the AAA space. And it still isn't really equal in a lot of ways either. I was recently watching all of the console showcases and Ubisoft Forward, which had me wondering, are the games coming out even that diverse? In social psychology, we have this concept of cognitive fallacies, or systematic patterns of deviation from rationality and judgment. That's a hefty sentence, but it basically means that sometimes your brain is just going to abandon being rational for a moment to rely on a biased concept it's serving up. And I'm not saying we should shame people for this. It's a normal consequence of our brains trying to simplify processing a lot of information at once. But we do have to be aware that this might happen for us. And what I have personally been seeing in a lot of gaming commentary recently has been a stunning example of the frequency illusion, or the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. Before we get into the numbers, let me know in the comments what showcases you watch and how you feel about upcoming games. What are you most looking forward to? I know that I'll basically be like this fall. With the frequency illusion, you basically start seeing one thing everywhere, but it's just because it's something that you recently noticed, learned, or experienced. There are actually two other cognitive fallacies that fuel this. Selective attention, or when your brain starts to notice something more often than it is actually true because you had your attention drawn to it, and confirmation bias, where each time you encounter a thing, it reinforces your belief that it is appearing more frequently, confirming your initial thoughts on this. So in typical me fashion, I wanted to dig a little deeper into this, but I was having a hard time finding actual data on the demographics of main playable characters in games at all, much less the games in these showcases that aren't even out yet. So, fine, I'll do it myself. I ended up counting up the amount of static playable characters from the Xbox Showcase, Ubisoft Forward, and PlayStation State of Play. The Nintendo Direct came out a little bit after I had written and started filming the script, so I didn't include anything from there. I did end up dropping roster games and games with custom character creators from this count, simply because there is a choice in the character that you play, as well as any games that simply didn't have a main playable character. Think city builders. And the results, in a year where there's a lot of yelling on the internet about how woke is infiltrating games, may surprise you. What, Lola? Yes, I know! Out of 23 games, the gender distribution was completely equal, and white main characters accounted for almost twice the amount of static playable main characters versus non-white people. Now, there were a few games that were oddball outliers here. For instance, I didn't bother trying to assign gender, race, or ethnicity to a mech suit, unless it was already stated in the trailer. One character was a mouse, identified as femme in the trailer, Winterboro, but being a mouse, not bound by human ideas about race and ethnicity. And I personally found the Fable main character to be pretty ethnically ambiguous, so I didn't try to assign her to one of these specific categories. Assassin's Creed Shadows was also unique in that it has two main playable characters. I ended up counting them each separately as they represent different parts of this conversation. Please note, this is a quick and dirty count and should not be taken as the word of God, but it does poke a bit of a hole in the idea that diverse characters are taking over. And even if there were more diverse characters than we've seen before, would that be a bad thing? Gaming, like all media, reflects the people who spend a lot of time in it. And unfortunately, there are people out there who will maintain that women don't play video games, that BIPOC people don't play video games, but the numbers say that they're wrong. For example, when we look at the weekly time spent playing video games by US adults as of December 2023 by gender, women's and men's gaming time spent is equal or close to equal until you get to the most time spent, which given that a lot of these people are probably full-time streamers, I wonder if it says something more about the environment of streaming and esports than anything else. In casual gaming, 1 to 5 hours spent a week, the largest category of gamers overall, women actually outpace men in the amount of gaming time. They were very slightly less represented in the more hardcore gamers at 20 plus hours a week, but even there, women represent 5% of hardcore gamers versus men's 8%. So how is it shocking then when we have strong women mixed in? Ma'am, Lola has a lot to say about this. Of course, some of the main characters from games are going to be women. Given the amount of time women spend playing video games, it would be foolish to continue to pump out games that only feature men as player characters. Similar comments have also been made about diverse backgrounds and ethnicities in games. And again, the distributions of gamers are pretty equal until you get into those hardcore gamers who are probably also streamers. And if you stream, you know how the environment can be for non-white folks. It is different. So is it really taking over for Assassin's Creed and Fable to have femme and BIPOC protagonists in 2024? No! The canon of storytelling is additive. Stories about one type of person don't go away when others are added to the canon. We can all have a piece of the pizza, but it's a lot harder for everyone to have a piece if one person who doesn't actually represent half of the people there takes half the pizza to their corner. And currently, the people holding half the pizza are also yelling at everyone who's trying to get a slice of the remaining half and telling them they're wrong for expecting a slice at all. Moreover, engaging with media that isn't always about you can actually be really good for your brain. Let's get into it. I've recently been playing slowly through Tales of Kinzera Zhao. In many ways, this is not my usual type of game. Platformers are always hard for me. I'm a certified button masher, and some of the speed and precision needed to play a platformer just does not come naturally to me. I started games like Ori and then almost immediately abandoned them as I struggled with the mechanics. But Tales of Kinzera jumped out at me when it released, not only because the game was heavily supported by one of my favorite nerdy media groups, the nerdy-ass voice actors of Critical Role, but also because of the story behind it. You see, I'm one of those gamers who can get sucked into a good story. If the story is compelling, I'm way more willing to accept something challenging to me. Let's not talk about how I destroyed my wrists playing the acclaimed roguelike Hades on my Switch in 2020. Can't help. It was a mistake. Use a controller, kids. The story of Tales of Kinzera is one of grief, love, and memory. Wrapped in the Bantu mythologies that the creator, Abu Bakr Salim, grew up on, it's a deeply personal and intensely compelling story of a man navigating feelings of grief and loss following the passing of his father. I won't get into it too much more because I'm not finished with the game, and also I'm a firm believer in letting other people experience things. But it is definitely a very different story from what I normally engage with. Side note, I kind of hate the idea of consuming stories. I don't know, I try to use engage because personally, if I'm really into a story, it isn't just consuming it. I am steeping myself in that world. It pops up in my brain at random times like a much more pleasant, loud ad on a website. I am engaging with that story and thinking about it and how it contrasts and compares with my real life and lived experiences, how it relates to other stories I've engaged with, etc. I don't know if this is born of neurodivergence or a kind of lonely childhood or what, but stories and characters really get their teeth in me. That's probably a whole other video, so I'll just hold on to that. But suffice to say, I will be using engage with when talking about stories, not consume. We've known for a long time that stories have power. Just like the cave paintings of the prehistoric age, our books, TV, movies, and video games not only reflect our real lives and lived experiences, but also tales of gods and demons and adventures that we wouldn't necessarily be able to engage with in our real world. We know that stories have an emotional impact for us. An early study on this looked at anxiety in children when told a frightening fairy tale. Kids who heard the frightening story, regardless of several other potential factors, had an increase in anxiety associated with that story. Further research explored this with a little more nuance. Another study focused on the use of storytelling in preventing workplace accidents found that people's safety behaviors improved following a story about possible safety issues assembling a child's swing, as they engaged with that story on an emotional level. But very importantly, they also found that people were not inordinately afraid because of the story. Rather, their emotional engagement with the story led them to be more cautious while also not being paralyzed with fear. Good stuff. Stories are helpful tools to engage with difficult and uncomfortable concepts. They don't necessarily endorse those concepts, but they do provide a place to mentally play with these difficult concepts in ways that doesn't create undue or damaging distress. Engaging with stories has also been shown in some studies to change how we associate with the world around us. One such study, published in 2021, found that people who were exposed to YA fiction self-associated with constructs of morality such as empathic concern for others. Another found that even people who don't engage as strongly with stories as, say, I do, performed better on a task test their empathy than those who were not exposed to fiction. And exposure to fictional stories also is correlated with better social support in their real life. It's worthwhile to note that many of these studies focus on reading specifically as a way of engaging with stories, and there is likely some difference in how we engage with a written story versus an audio-visual one. But I don't think it's enough to fully discount this kind of evidence. And storytelling is deeply useful in our real day-to-day lives. Communication experts such as Simon Sinek have been pushing storytelling as a communications tool for a long time because, as Simon says, people don't remember statistics that get spat at them, but they do remember the stories that someone tells. Whatever you think about Simon Sinek, he probably does have a point here. And for me, what will stick about Tales of Kinsera is not necessarily me struggling with a different form of game than what I usually play, but the story of a man exploring his culture, his connection with that culture, and grief following the death of a loved one. And it's a story I personally haven't experienced. I'm a femme-identifying person who's not close with my father. I've not suffered this particular kind of grief, and the culture is unfamiliar to me. And yet, I engage with it. I feel strongly about it. And it's possible that engaging with a story so different from my own is providing a very real benefit to my brain. Let's talk about cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is defined as the readiness with which the person's concept system changes selectively in response to appropriate environmental stimuli. That is a whole word salad if you're not somebody who's in the science world, but the simple version is this. It's being able to change your mind quickly and easily when needed, adapting your thinking and behavior to new situations or changing environments. While some might see this as being wishy-washy or a flip-flopper, it's actually a very important and helpful quality to possess. It allows you to adjust your approach when you come upon new info, solve problems in innovative ways, and learn better from your experiences. Cognitive flexibility has a lot of benefits according to most literature. From being better able to learn new skills and engage in new activities as you age and experience normal cognitive decline associated with aging, to helping you build your resilience and tolerate distressing situations, such as one we all experienced very recently in the COVID-19 pandemic, to building better self-efficacy, or having confidence that you can achieve your goals, solve problems, and deal with whatever comes your way. Interestingly enough, a lot of people tend to really push self-efficacy, but nobody wants to talk about what actually leads to self-efficacy because it's very complex. Looking at literature on this, there does seem to be a connection between the type of stimuli that you seek out, in this case, stories that fall outside of your own lived experience, and improved cognitive flexibility. In one study, people were presented with some complex and unexpected events happening within a virtual reality. They were not the events that they thought they might experience. When their cognitive flexibility was assessed, it turned out that exposure to the unexpected events increased their performance on cognitive flexibility tasks. And while that, in and of itself, doesn't explicitly say anything about diverse stories specifically, it's not a huge leap to make, and there is other work that does touch on this. A review of literature on this topic conducted in 2011 suggests that experiencing different kinds of diversity that challenge what we expect aka that don't meet the stereotypes that we have in our mind about what a certain group of people is like, can make us more tolerant and also improve various aspects of our mental well-being, including our cognitive flexibility. There's a really key factor here to pay attention to, that for this to work, we have to experience diversity that challenges what we expect, not stereotypical representations that support what we think we already know. Assassin's Creed Shadows and the online response around whether or not a black man can be a samurai is actually a very strong example of this. Lack of education on Yasuke's history and the history in general of Africans in Japan during the Sengoku period leads people to scream into the void about how he doesn't fit, while also conveniently ignoring the Japanese woman right here on the cover. Being an assassin doesn't make you invisible, apparently, but being a woman does. So Yasuke becomes what we call in psychology a counter-stereotypic individual, or someone who does not fit common stereotypes or typical expectations about a particular group, challenging the usual assumptions around groups of individuals. Our increased empathy and tolerance is not the only benefit to experiencing this sort of story. A study published in 2013 found that when folks were asked to think about people who didn't meet stereotypic representations and then given a task that measured divergent thinking or exploring multiple different approaches to solving a problem versus proceeding with one thing you know how to do already, they performed better on that task. What this means for the average Joe, Jane, or Jan is people were more creative and better able to solve problems after being exposed to a counter-stereotypical representation. Unfortunately, there was one huge limitation. If you scored high on what in psychology we call a personal need for structure, you would not observe the same benefits as others. Your personal need for structure refers in this context to how much you prefer for your environment to be predictable. People who had the highest PNS were uncomfortable with abandoning their stereotypical thoughts, and thus they fought it, and did not show the same cognitive benefit as those who are more comfortable with adjusting their viewpoint for new information. And this happens all the time today on the internet. People are generally often unwilling to adjust their worldview for new information, and we also seek purpose. And there are a few very high-profile individuals that are really pushing an us versus them attitude on this, but they do not have your best interests at heart. They're there to make money off of you, frankly. Encouraging you to think and experience games for yourself does not support their own motivation. They don't want you to be more creative and flexible. They know that that would end their grift. Counter-stereotypical thinking is good for your brain. Your personal need for structure isn't bad, it just kind of is, but it can definitely have impacts on how you think and solve problems. One pilot study looked at this in the context of math problems. They found that when folks rated their own PNS higher on a scale, they had a lower success rate solving word problems. Balancing your personal need for structure with your brain's need for flexibility is a tricky business. Your personal need for structure is not inherently a bad thing, but as in all things, if you have a high PNS and you never expose yourself to other structures, you will also likely experience some negative impacts here. A high personal need for structure is a common factor in perfectionism, which is often correlated with higher anxiety and more academic procrastination. It often leads to being more resistant to change, which is typically associated with lower scores on measures of creative performance. And of course, people with higher PNS often also have lower cognitive flexibility. I do want to point out here, I'm not here to try and make everyone feel bad about this particular part of human personality. If anything, I'm here to try and help. So as I was thinking about this, I came up with a quick thought journey that I invite you to join me on. Begin by sitting or lying down in a comfortable position within a quiet and comforting space. Allow your eyes to shut. Take a deep breath in for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold for a count of 2. 1, 2, and exhale for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Repeat this as you need to until your body is relaxed and your mind is calm. Feel free to pause this video if you need additional time here. If closing your eyes for this practice doesn't work for you, you can also gaze into a candle physically or just in this video. Once your mind and body are calm, visualize yourself sitting comfortably as you are right now. If you're someone who struggles with visualization, think instead about what makes you feel comfortable and calm. Now, bring your awareness to your mind. Notice any thoughts that arise without judgment. And as you observe your thoughts, begin to notice any that might be influenced by stereotypes. These could be judgments about yourself or others based on age, gender, race, appearance, or profession. Recognize these thoughts without self-criticism. We all have biases. Our brains will all latch on to the stereotypes when busy or overwhelmed, and awareness is the first step to change. Choose one stereotypical thought that stands out to you and ask yourself, where did this thought come from? Is this thought based on personal experience or is it influenced by societal conditioning? Is this thought helpful or harmful? And how would you feel if you let go of this thought? Now, imagine replacing this stereotypical thought with one that is more compassionate and inclusive. For example, if you noticed a stereotype about a particular group of people, replace it with an acknowledgement of their individuality and unique qualities. Visualize yourself going forward in the world with this acknowledgement at the root of your interactions. Imagine talking to someone from that group, and instead of thinking about them in a stereotypical way, notice what makes them unique. Notice what makes you unique. You are more than just the sum of your traits, and so are they. Notice what is different and unique between you and the person that you are talking to. These differences are to be celebrated, not feared. Take a moment to sit here and breathe. Take a deep breath in for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold for a count of 2. 1, 2. And exhale for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Repeat the following affirmations to yourself, silently or verbally. I am open to seeing the world and others with fresh, unbiased eyes. I acknowledge and release any stereotypes I hold. I embrace the uniqueness and diversity of every individual, and I choose to think with compassion and understanding. As we come to the end of this meditation, take a moment to appreciate the effort you've made to challenge and change your thinking. Know that this is an ongoing journey, and that each step you take makes a difference. Bring your attention back to your breath. Take a few deep, grounding breaths. Wiggle your fingers and toes. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. Carry this awareness with you throughout your day. And remember that you have the power to choose your thoughts and challenge stereotypes whenever they arise. Remember how good it is for your brain to stretch in this way. As you cultivate cognitive flexibility, you enhance your ability to adapt to new situations, solve problems creatively, and embrace diverse perspectives. This mental agility reduces stress and fosters resilience, empowering you to thrive in a never-changing world. Breathe in this sense of limitless possibility and exhale, feeling a profound sense of mental clarity and strength. What stories will you engage with this week/month/year to challenge your own perspectives and increase that cognitive flexibility? Let's chat about it in the comments. Thanks for watching. As always, if you liked this, you know the drill. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more. See you soon. Be excellent to yourself and others. Mwah!